As political divisions persist, will U.S. President Joe Biden's efforts to overhaul infrastructure and social welfare ever get done? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat.
We continue to move forward and continue to have good conversations through the weekend and up to right now. I believe that we will get this done, and we will get it done soon.
That is U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He was talking about President Joe Biden's signature $1.5 trillion bill. If passed, it could fundamentally reshape underfunded social programs and crumbling infrastructure. But it's being held up by infighting in the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy is still in flux with supply chain disruptions, worker shortages, and inflation on the rise. Will Biden's legislative agenda get passed and provide a shot in the arm to a sluggish economy? Let's get right to our panel and discuss this a little bit further. Joining us from Atlanta, Georgia, Robert Patillo is a civil rights attorney and talk radio host. From McLean, Virginia, we have John Sitilides. He is a geopolitical strategist with Trilogy Advisors, LLC. Here in Washington, D.C., Joseph Williams is a senior news editor at U.S. News and World Report. And in New York, we have Aaron Mate. He is the host of the Pushback with Aaron Mate show on the Grayzone. Welcome all of you to the broadcast. Aaron, let me start with you. Right now, legislation's still sort of in flux. They're trying to work out the details, hammering out all the little items. Some stuff goes, some stuff stays. We're still seeing this tug of war between moderates and progressives. How is this all going to shake out, do you think?
It's amazing how it's unfolded. I mean, recall that when this measure was first proposed, the figure was something like $6 trillion. Then it became $3.5 trillion. And now we're down to even less than half that, $1.5 trillion. And, look, we all know the reason why. Manchin and Sinema have been refusing to fund some of the basic necessities that most other countries provide their people, like an expansion of health care, providing paid family leave. It's just they've been so intransigent, and the result is that now we're at the stalemate with Biden having this deadline before he leaves for overseas. But the question is, I guess, how much are progressives willing to abandon of their original agenda, and will this measure offer people really anything substantive? If Manchin and Sinema have their way, it looks like basically the American people just continue to get left out.
So, Joseph, he's talking about Manchin and Sinema. Those are two U.S. senators, Manchin from West Virginia and Sinema from Arizona. And one of the areas where we're seeing things getting whittled away is Medicare and Medicaid. Let's listen to Senator Joe Manchin.
What we are proposing in changes and expenditures are paid for. Paid for. That's the point that Senator McConnell does not want to acknowledge, and he should. 4 years ago, we went through a tax cut which added dramatically to our nation's debt and gave tax breaks to the richest people in America. That was the highest priority of the Trump administration and the Senate Republicans.
Well, we'll try to get that soundbite from Joe Manchin in just a bit. That obviously was Dick Durbin from Illinois, but he's talking about funding. Let's talk a little bit about that, Joe, because you're seeing Mitch McConnell just kind of saying, well, we can't pay for this. He didn't seem to have any issues when Trump was trying to spend quite a bit when he was in office for 4 years.
Well, and now the shoe is on the other foot, in that those tax cuts to the wealthiest have kind of blown a hole in the budget and is making these priorities even harder to fund. What's interesting, however, and what the through line here is that you have a tax cut for the upper echelons of income, people who will bring down wealth more than probably all of us on this program combined could even dream of in 1 year. And yet, even though those were passed under Republican auspices, certainly Senator Sinema was reluctant to see them go, and Senator Manchin himself is kind of hesitant about raising income or raising taxes on the upper level incomes, even though those would help the pay-fors that he has insisted upon the programs having in order for them to get his vote. So it's all a lot of sausage making right out in the open, and shows how far the country has been pulled to the right when you have senators on the left, theoretically anyway, who are fighting to keep tax cuts that blew such a hole in the budget that they're now worried about adding to by helping people that will help them not only make more money, but also pay taxes themselves in the long run. So it's really kind of a Alice through the looking glass moment where people get to see a lot of what goes on behind closed doors in real time and, relatively speaking, out in the open.
Well, I teed up the soundbite for Joe Manchin. We have it now. He's talking about Medicaid and Medicare. Let's listen to what he has to say.
I believe that government should be your best partner, but it shouldn't be your provider. We have a moral obligation to provide to those who have incapacity, such as physical or mental, but everyone else should be able to help and chip in and all that.
So, Joe, this partner-provider distinction, I mean, my daughter lives in Scotland. They've got free health care. I mean, you can go to a number of countries, and that's the way it is. And yet here in this country, any kind of move towards providing a little bit more in health care seems to be just this target. What gives here?
What gives is wealthy contributors, and they're giving to his campaign, apparently. And that is part of the issue that we have in Washington overall, is the way our political campaigns are funded. It's in their interest to make sure, it's in big donors' interest to make sure that we don't have systems like Scotland or other countries in the European Union that have healthcare provided from day one. One of the problems that we're having in the United States in getting workers back to the office and back on the job is the fact that child care is so hard to come by, and Manchin and Sinema seem to be opposed to that, or at least they want means testing. Now, that's something no other country does. If you have a child and you live in a particular country, you are allowed to have child care, and you are allowed to go to work without worrying about the fate of your children, because that overall helps you become a more productive citizen, which in turn helps pay taxes. So there's a lot of related items here, but the biggest problem that I see is the fact that the country has been pulled so far to the right that things like that, statements like what Manchin has made, even although statistics prove him wrong and prove him to be talking about something that would benefit the country in the long run, they still get made and they're still passed for logic and ways that bills that help ordinary people don't get done.
John, you just heard Joe say that the country's being tilted towards the right. Give us the perspective of Republicans who must be watching some of this with a certain amount of bemusement.
Well, I mean, they're letting the Democratic Party play out this intra-party war that has been going on for really the last 4 to 5 months. And I think one of the things that was most astonishing, Mike, was the recent revelation that Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had actually initialed an agreement with Senator Joe Manchin in July, when Manchin said he would never sign on to a $3.5 trillion infrastructure or social welfare bill, and it would have to be much lower. Schumer signed on to that, and we still don't know to what extent he shared that information with Speaker Pelosi, with President Biden, or anyone else involved in these negotiations. This was never going to be a $3.5 trillion bill under Joe Manchin's wishes. Senator Sinema, similarly, is representing an independent state, and so there's not just a policy discussion in Washington, but these are senators who have to be reelected. And Joe Manchin won in West Virginia in a state that voted plus 17 for Donald Trump last year. So it's a very conservative state, and West Virginians think differently than national Democrats. So do Arizonans, and I think in many ways there are possibly several other more moderate senators, such as Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, who's facing a very difficult reelection campaign next year, and even John Tester in Montana, who are happy to see Manchin and Sinema taking all the blows, but probably are not likely to vote anything as demanding as Bernie Sanders' $6 trillion or the $3.5 trillion we've been talking about for months.
Robert, we're talking a lot of numbers here. I'll go back over them. He just mentioned 6 million, 6 trillion, I should say. Millions a drop in the bucket when they're talking about these big dollar items. 6 trillion, 3.5, now down to 1.5. The Economic Policy Institute, it's a nonpartisan think tank here in the U.S., actually crunched the numbers, because all we do is just throw these numbers around. What does it really mean? And they determined that this will cut somewhere in the, probably around the area of about 2 million fewer jobs. These numbers mean something, so break it down for us. I mean, what are we seeing whittled away here, and how does it impact the American people?
Well, first of all, I think people have to understand when they talk about the old $3.5 trillion, which many progressives are still hoping that we get somewhere close to, that's a 10-year number. So we don't talk about military budgets over 10 years. We talk about a 1-year military budget. So stretching this out over 10 years, they're talking about something like $350 billion per year, when we spend about $780 billion per year on our military and national defense. So I think when you put in those types of numbers, people understand that when you're looking at free 2 years of college education, early childhood education, dental and eye care being covered by Medicaid, those sorts of social programs, things that are amazingly popular with the American people and that got 80 million people nearly to vote for Joe Biden in the last election. Well, they understand that if you start focusing on those programs instead of that big dollar amount at the end, then you get more local and national support. That if you keep punishing and pushing this number $3.5 trillion into people's heads, Republicans have won the communications battle on this bill because most people do not know all the things that will be provided for. All they hear is the fear mongering about how much it will cost. Meanwhile, if it was a tax cut or if it was an aircraft carrier or a bomber, there's no discussion like this at all.
Well, to your point, $770 billion, nobody blinks an eye about that on Capitol Hill. That kind of spending happens all the time. Why is it's better to create bombs and destroyers than actually pay for some of these things that people actually need, these kitchen table issues?
Well, as I said, Republicans have done an amazingly good job of winning the PR and the communications battle. I think the Biden administration dropped the ball on this because for a big piece of legislation like this, when you're talking about trillions of dollars of legislation, we should have seen Biden spokespeople on every single cable news channel, on the Today Show, on the Tonight Show, on the Daily Show, and whatever, this show and every other show that there could be, making sure that the American people know exactly what they're trying to do in this large of a bill. When it comes to the climate aspect of the Build Back Better plan, we have dealt with wildfires and bomb cyclones this year. If there's any time the American people will get on board with a climate change agenda, I think right now will be that. But the administration never did the groundwork of selling this to the American people, and because of that, you do not have the American people on the side of it. And the Republicans are able to win the argument by simply pushing the big government, high taxes, $3.5 trillion number, and that is what spoiled this bill from the beginning. While they're whittling back on things that the American people voted for in 2020.
Joseph, you're out there covering politics in Washington, D.C. Where did they make the mistakes? What should they have done?
Well, certainly selling the bill, as your previous guest talked about, being on shows, telling people what's in it. They also apparently failed to get the groundwork done ahead of time. They didn't make sure that they had the votes before all of this became public, or they started negotiating in public, which only opens you up to more criticism. And look, there is a fine distinction between what you spend on a bomber and what you spend on daycare. One is much easier for people to imagine as a protector against a threat, as a protector against somebody who's coming to do harm to the country, where all Americans were unified in the sense that we want to be protected. However, it's a lot more esoteric and a lot vaguer to talk about spending money on childcare unless you're a parent. And even then, if you're a conservative parent, you don't want the government paying for something that you feel like you can pay for on your own. However, again, this goes back to another through line that we're going to be talking about here tonight, the economy. The economy is stalling mainly because parents have opted out of the workforce during the middle of a pandemic. Mainly women have opted out during the pandemic because they can't reliably find childcare. And so that is another issue that the Democrats probably should have hammered into people's heads, that this is all a part of something larger. This will get the economy back a lot quicker. And if we get this under control along with the pandemic, we should be in a better position to raise the boat for everybody.
Aaron, as the day progressed, we kept hearing more and more from Capitol Hill of things being whittled away. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin couldn't get on board when it came to family leave. Initially it was 12 weeks, then it was down to 4 weeks. Now he says it should be gone altogether. I was just in Iceland at the end of the 2019 parliamentary session. They passed a law extending parental leave not to 12 weeks, but to 12 months. These progressive ideas are actually flying off the table in other countries and doing very well. They're very popular there. They poll very well here in the United States, and progressives know that, but they can't seem to get it over the finish line. What needs to happen there?
It's really amazing that even the Democratic Party proposal, which is 4 weeks of family leave, even if that were enacted, which it looks like it won't be now, it still would pale in comparison to other countries. It speaks to where this country is at. And look, in terms of what needs to happen, I think Democrats, progressives should be more aggressive towards people like Joe Manchin. They knew that Joe Manchin would have these positions, so I think they should have gone to West Virginia and held rallies there, made him try to answer to his own people for his policies. It's true that Manchin has had success there, but so did Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders did well there in 2016. He won, I think, almost every county, if not all of them, in the primary. So I think Democrats should be basically recognizing people like Manchin and Sinema for what they are, which is conservatives, and not allies but foes, and make them own up for their positions. Make them vote on not taxing billionaires. But one problem arises there, and this is where it's not fair to just blame Manchin and Sinema, because it was reported today that it looks like Democrats are also going to not get on board with this proposal for a billionaires tax. And that opposition doesn't just come from Manchin and Sinema. Nancy Pelosi was also reportedly opposed to that too. So for certain people like Pelosi and other centrists, it's convenient to just blame Manchin and Sinema, but the problem goes a lot deeper than just two senators.
Joseph, I'll ask you the Joseph question. It seemed like when Joe Biden was running for president, if he won, he would be the most powerful man in Washington, but it seems like Joe Manchin is. It has to be kind of a surprising turn of events that one senator can have such sway over all the others.
Well, again, I hate to belabor the point, but it goes back to the fact that the country has been pulled to the right. And by that, I don't just mean the fact that some of the conservative policies of Manchin, a Democrat from a red state, not that just some of his positions are a lot more feasible than they should be, but the fact that we have a Republican Party that's in lockstep opposition. You go back maybe 20 or 30 years ago to the days of Tip O'Neill, you had a centrist Republican Party, you had liberal Republicans that could be counted on to help finish this deal and get it over the line. You don't have that anymore. You don't have Republicans who are interested in governing anymore. They are basically standing on the sidelines. When we did have a hellscape happening in California over the summertime, we did have definitive proof that cost people, some people their lives, some people their livelihoods, that climate change is a real thing. But instead of helping get on board with Democrat solutions or coming up with alternative solutions of their own that will solve the problem of climate change, there has been no action on the Republican side and very little criticism of them for doing so.
John, let me ask you about what we're seeing with both of these parties, because the Republican Party, back in the good old days, there was the Chamber of Commerce, the guy out on the golf course Republican, and then you might have this faction, the Tea Party, and then it seems like the party was consumed by the Tea Party. Now you're seeing this fight between the moderates and the progressives in the Democratic Party. Are we seeing both parties kind of tilting in each direction? And we do kind of see the country as being kind of in the middle.
Yes, in many ways, if you look at statistics over the last 10 to 15 years, you've seen that both parties have moved more to their extremes. And certainly we have a Democratic Party today that is very different than the one in the 1990s. Bill Clinton could never have gotten elected president anytime in the last 10 years under current Democratic Party demographics. And similarly, the Republican Party has become a more populist party, and where it was once derided and stereotyped as a so-called fat cat, Wall Street, corporate type party. If you really look at how Donald Trump has changed the debate inside the Republican Party since 2015, it's much more populist, much more oriented towards working class positions. And you see this playing out inside the Republican Party with the debate over illegal immigration, where more corporate types want cheaper labor and open borders, and American workers who've seen their jobs disappear in the Midwest and in other parts of the country don't want to see their wages depressed by millions of illegal immigrants coming into the United States, is a furious debate inside the Republican Party. So we're going through some fundamental domestic political shifts in the United States. This social welfare bill is revealing many of the fissures inside the Democratic Party. And perhaps if there's a Republican president and a Republican Congress in the near future, you'll see many of these debates inside the Republican Party play out publicly as well.
If I can jump in real quickly, I mean, there is one thing that the Republican Party is doing, and that's communicating that it's a populist party, but really not enacting very many populist policies other than immigration. Donald Trump and a Republican Congress and a Republican House and Senate presided over these billionaire tax cuts that are causing such a fissure within the Democratic Party. So again, I think it's interesting that the Republicans are being seen as party of populists when their policies say otherwise.
Let me ask you this, Joseph. The U.S. Economy, it's still sluggish. Some economists now saying the growth rate probably going to be about 2.7%. We know that this has been whittled down. I mean, we've thrown the figures around 6 trillion, 3.5, now 1.5. Is there still enough there to add some juice to the economy, do you think?
I think there's still enough there, but it's heading in the wrong direction. The more these policies get whittled down, the more difficult it's going to be to entice workers back to the job, to the office, to the factory, because a lot of these policies were constructed on the notion that it would help workers and it would help average families. Now, the fewer months you get from paid family leave, which apparently is not going to happen at all, the fewer months you get paid for childcare, that's going to make it much more difficult to get workers back into the workforce, which is going to continue to be a drag on the U.S. economy.
And Robert, let's talk a little bit more about the economy. We've got still about $24 billion worth of goods sitting at ports. We've got this supply chain issue there. Consumer inflation, we're seeing inflation going up. Spending, though, also up. Wall Street seems to be doing pretty well. But we have these great resignations, all these people walking away from jobs. There's a lot percolating there. Do you suspect any of this can improve before the holidays?
Before the holidays, no. I think we're very much where we are for the remainder of the year when it comes to any of these issues, particularly the supply chain issues. Let's understand that the issue with America's ports did not happen in the last 8 months of the last year. This is something that's been building up over the course of the last 20 years between bad contracts, bad infrastructures, not doing proper port expansions, the centralization of some of the supply chain issues where you have, let's say, for example, Newark, the port of Newark, which is crowded beyond recognition. But then you have the Port of Baltimore only slightly down the coast, which is operating completely normally. So we've needed to fix these things for years, and I wish the Biden administration had tied this in to much of the infrastructure spending he's talking about. If he could be campaigning across the country right now saying that the reason we have to pass the Build Back Better plan, the reason we need an infrastructure bill is to fix these supply chain issues that have been bugging us for generations now and are just now metastasizing. So I think what we really have to start looking at is how will this diminished bill affect Democrats in 2022? Because if you're running for a re-election, right here in Georgia, we have Raphael Warnock, who's in a very vulnerable seat. What exactly is Joe Biden giving Democrats to campaign on? You can't campaign on Afghanistan. You can't campaign on voting rights. You can't campaign on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And now the signature bill, the Build Back Better plan, is being cut down and diminished to the point that there's not really going to be much of a there to go bragging around the country in order to justify maintaining the House and the Senate going into a crucial midterm election. So this is why I think the progressives are going to have to make a stronger stance against everything that's being cut out, because Manchin and Sinema cannot simply go against the will of 80 million people.
Aaron, let's talk about that, because they did make this pledge. A lot of these candidates, when they ran for office, again, it's these kitchen table issues. And we're already seeing Terry McAuliffe, who's running for governor in Virginia, saying, look, you guys got to get this done. He's in a very tight race in this gubernatorial race in Virginia. What is going to be the likely impact on Democrats when they go to the polls in 2022?
It's a great question. If you keep promising stuff you can't deliver, will voters punish you? And I think there's a strong historical precedent for voters just deciding it's not worth their time to go out and vote because you're not giving them anything. I mean, look at Georgia. I mean, the big promise there on election day was, put these two Democratic senators in, Warnock and Ossoff, and we'll send out $2,000 checks immediately. Those checks didn't go out immediately, and then they got pared down to something like $1,400. So that didn't even happen, even something as simple as sending out checks. So if history is any guide, yes, Democrats will be punished, and there's so much to punish them for. I mean, now it looks like this provision would finally have the U.S. negotiate with pharmaceutical companies, a major issue for so many people who are paying astronomical costs for drugs that are available for cheaper in virtually every other country in the world. It looks like that is not going to go through here as well. So if I were taking bets, yes, I would bet the Democrats are going to pay a very major price on Election Day in 2022.
Joseph, Aaron talked about this provision. Senator Ron Wyden was talking about this plan to tax the wealthiest 700 people in the U.S. Again, Senator Joe Manchin, he's getting a lot of play here in this broadcast, had something to say about that. Let's listen to what he said.
Everybody in this country that has been blessed and prospered should pay a patriotic tax. If you're to the point to where you're able to use reforms if you can to your advantage and you end up with a zero tax liability, but have had a very, very good life and you've had a lot of opportunities, there should be a 15% patriotic tax.
Joseph, what do you make of this rationale?
Well, I mean, patriotic tax is a great way to frame it. But again, we have seen over and over and over again centrist Democrats as well as Republicans reluctant to raise taxes on wealthy people, even though the wealthy largely gain that wealth and or were able to maintain or keep that wealth based on government policies. I mean, Elon Musk got tax abatements, got tax write-offs to develop Tesla, and now he's worth more than many small countries. He should definitely pay more than a patriotic tax, and the patriotic tax sounds a lot more voluntary than other tax programs would be. And even so, if you do create a lot of these programs that will tax the wealthy, they have the means to hire lawyers to find loopholes. So a lot of it is PR, a lot of it is a sieve-like ability to get through these tax barriers that the wealthy can have. But to ask them to pay something voluntarily, that probably isn't going to happen.
Aaron, let me ask you about this too, because I think this is so interesting right now. You got the Pandora Papers that have just come out. You've got the reporting by the New York Times about Donald Trump not paying taxes 10 out of 15 years. Income inequality is a huge deal here in the United States, and it seems to me that a lot of people in the country feel like the wealthy should pay their fair share.
Absolutely. I mean, look at what's happened during the pandemic. About 20% of U.S. households have lost their entire life savings. Meanwhile, there was a study put out by the Institute for Policy Studies that found that America's richest billionaires increased their wealth by $2.1 trillion. It's really obscene. You have people struggling right now to just provide for the basics. So how can you not support a tax on billionaires right now? There's this old argument that that will somehow kill jobs. I mean, there's no data to back that up at all. It's clearly those who are opposed to a billionaire's tax. And again, it's not just mentioned in cinema. It's reportedly people like Nancy Pelosi, too, just don't want to go against their main constituency, which is wealthy Americans. That's just what it comes down to.
The people who fund some of these campaigns. John, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the deadline to get this bill done is Sunday, October 31st. Are they likely to get it done by then?
I don't think anyone knows. This is going to have to be resolved really after there may be a deal, and there may not be a deal ultimately in the Democratic Senate. And then the progressives have to step up to the plate. And I believe just a short while ago, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stated publicly that if this bill is going to be proposed as it seems to have been negotiated between the White House, Senator Manchin, and Senator Sinema, she will not vote for it because, as she put it, she will not vote for a bill that does not reduce climate emissions. So if that's going to be her number one priority, does she also influence several dozen of the sort of harder, committed eco types in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party to vote against it?
Well,
and unless
John,
Nancy Pelosi is able to find enough moderate Republicans
to jump in here,
3 or 4 dozen Democrats who vote against it, they're not going to get this larger social welfare bill.
All right.
And then
we've actually run out of time, John. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. We've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching another edition of The Heat.